It is such a pleasure to see you all here. And we're super excited because we're going to be celebrating CMIST, our first year, and we're going to be talking about what is at the core of CMIST, which is a dedication to public service. And we're very, very lucky to have Ambassador Nathaniel Fick here, who is an exemplar of dedication to public service in many different respects. So I think you're really going to enjoy our conversation. I'm certainly looking forward to it, but let me give you his formal introduction now. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Audrey Kurth Cronin, and I'm director of the Carnegie Mellon Institute for Strategy and Technology, CMIST. We're a university-wide initiative that focuses on the smart development, use, and governance of emerging technologies that are changing war and peace. In collaboration with the great scientists and engineers here at Carnegie Mellon, who are creating the cutting-edge technology that is changing the world, we ensure that our work not only advances innovation, but also informs the creation of sound policies grounded in real-world technical expertise. CMIST serves as a bridge at Carnegie Mellon University between those who are building the technologies, those who shape policy, and those who enact it, fostering dialogue and collaboration to maximize the global benefits and minimize the harms for the United States and its allies and partners. So today we're proudly celebrating 1 year of driving that vision forward, empowering leaders, diplomats, and policymakers to navigate the complex intersection of technology and policy worldwide. So as we reflect on that first year, we're so excited that we're here, a year into this. The crucial role of emerging technologies that we're focusing upon, it's very fitting that we hear from someone who has been at the forefront of these issues on the international scale. It's my great honor to introduce Ambassador Nathaniel C. Fick, who is a leader whose career reflects an extraordinary commitment to public service in many different dimensions. I don't know anyone else who has done so many different kinds of service in both tech and diplomacy anywhere close to Ambassador Fick. Sworn in as the first U.S. Ambassador at Large for cyberspace and digital policy in September of 2022, Ambassador Fick brings a wealth of experience at the intersection of technology, national security, and diplomacy. He's leading a groundbreaking effort at the State Department to bring digital expertise into the heart of U.S. diplomacy. Ambassador Fick and his team launched a tech-focused training program, for example, to prepare our diplomats to navigate cyber threats and emerging technologies. But it's not just about training experts in Washington. He's also leading efforts on the world stage to foster a culture of cyberspace diplomacy and solidarity among our friends, allies, and partners, advocating for a free, open, and secure digital future for all. Let me tell you a little bit about his background. Before joining the State Department, Ambassador Fick contributed to the private sector as CEO of the cybersecurity software company Endgame from 2012 through its acquisition by Elastic in 2019. He then spearheaded Elastic's global information security business. His leadership and innovation in the tech world was recognized by Fast Company and Forbes. His influence continues to shape the future of cybersecurity policy on a global scale, and he knows policy because he's worked and created things in the private sector related to tech. But Ambassador Fick's path to public service began much earlier. As a Marine Corps infantry and reconnaissance officer, he participated in the earliest phases of Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan and Pakistan in 2001 and 2002, and he led a reconnaissance unit during the invasion of Iraq in 2003. His distinguished service and frontline experiences laid the foundation for his deep understanding of both the human and technological dimensions of conflict and of how to lead human beings in very complex and challenging environments. Ambassador Fick's reflections on his military service in his book, One Bullet Away, which was a New York Times bestseller, offer a powerful glimpse into leadership, sacrifice, and the realities of modern warfare. The book earned many accolades and praise, including the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation's General Wallace M. Green Jr. Award for Outstanding Nonfiction, and the Colby Award for the William E. Colby Military Writers Symposium. It soon became required reading for officers who were deploying to Afghanistan and Iraq. Ambassador's writing has also appeared in many other very high-profile outlets, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Foreign Policy, among many, many other places. He's been a frequent contributor to television and radio on national security issues, including as the former on-air national security consultant for CBS News. He was raised just outside of Baltimore, and you Pittsburgh Steelers fans should not hold that against him.
Just keep your mouth shut.
Ambassador Fick has remained true to his roots, now living in Maine and balancing his demanding work with a passion for skiing and outdoors activities. He's a Dartmouth grad with a degree in classics, and he has an MPA from the Harvard Kennedy School and an MBA from the Harvard Business School. His journey from military service to the highest levels of cyberspace and digital policy is a testament to his commitment to progress and especially to public service. So we're going to talk about that now. The two of us will sit up here, and I'll talk to Ambassador Fick for a few minutes, and then there will be some time for questions and answers at the end. So save up your thoughts for that. Okay? Thank you. Let's welcome Ambassador Fick.
Which side do you prefer?
You
okay, great. Thank you.
I think that's how our mics are.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Dr. Cronin,
Audrey,
for the welcome. And more importantly, happy birthday, CMIST. This is exciting. I'm honored to be here at your first anniversary celebration.
Well, thank you. It's just such a pleasure to have you here because you embody everything that we're trying to instill in our young undergraduates and graduates, in a dedication to public service and a willingness to do hard things well and to lead people and to have a passion for the positive. One of the things that you emphasized earlier in our event last night was how keeping a positive mission is so important, and especially today when we're in a media, well, how can I put this? When we're in an atmosphere of a lot of negativity, it's just so important that we remember what our mission is and that we stay positive. So I want to start out by asking you, when you were offered this position, you had so many other opportunities. You've had a successful career in technology and venture capital. And when Secretary Blinken approached you about the position of serving as America's inaugural ambassador at large for cyberspace and digital policy, why did you accept?
It's actually kind of a funny story. I had a call. Secretary Blinken, I'd known him a little bit when he was in the private sector before going to the State Department. And his office reached out and said, Secretary Blinken would like to talk to you about this new tech diplomacy thing, and he's looking for somebody to lead it. And I was like living not in Washington. My head was not in this. I got on the phone with him with a list of people I thought he should talk to lead it. And you know, naivete on my part. Once he offered me the opportunity, I said yes on the phone, actually. And he said, well, maybe you should talk to your wife. I said, no, the answer is yes. Because I think, talking to the students here, something that you may find is that, I think you'll find, is that life only looks linear in hindsight. Things that seem inevitable or predestined are not. And as you're going forward, we're all kind of grasping in a dark room. But every now and then, something will come your way that feels like the perfect combination of all the experiences you had previously. For me, this was that. It was a very meaningful portfolio at a consequential time in the world, and the very rare opportunity in government to build something new, which doesn't happen very often. So I leapt at the chance. And my wife said, this is an odd choice for you because three things that you really hate are wearing a suit, You'll notice, given the opportunity on a college campus not to wear a suit, I am not. Flying overnight on airplanes and small talk. But I'll tell you, wearing a suit, flying overnight on airplanes and small talk, that's like 90% of this job. So, but it has been, I'm a little more than 2 years in now, and I'm glad to say my early instincts were correct, that it's a fantastic portfolio. It's the right time to have it. Secretary Blinken is all in on this, and so we've had, and I have 3 members of my team sitting right here. I think we collectively would all say that we get the support we need to do hard things.
So what would you say is the best and the worst part, excluding those 3 things that you didn't want to do, about this new exciting mission?
Yeah, look, the best part is, without a doubt, is being able to work closely with our allies and partners around the world. And those of you who were at dinner last night got to meet Ambassador Benedict Wexler from Switzerland and Minister Paula Bogantes from Costa Rica. And they're emblematic of what we mean when we talk about like-minded partners. Countries, governments, public servants around the world who share with us a commitment to the values that undergird our policies, and being able to operate at scale in the world hand in hand with people like that is incredibly gratifying. The worst is just being face to face everywhere and all the time with the more authoritarian sensibilities that I think are on the other side of the ledger. We're in the middle of maybe not the middle, maybe the early innings of a global competition to decide, to determine which operating system, and I say that metaphorically, is going to be the dominant one. Is it going to be one that is open and rights respecting and participatory, that believes in things like market economies and representative governance and equal treatment of all people? Or is it going to be a much darker, much more authoritarian view? And make no mistake, I think tech is the leading battleground right now of that competition.
Well, let's go back a little earlier in your life, because we have a lot of students in the audience, undergraduates and graduates. And you were an undergraduate at Dartmouth, beautiful place. You know exactly why you love to ski. But you majored in classics. How did that lead you from a major in studying Latin and Greek and I guess archaeology? How did that lead you into becoming a U.S. Marine after graduating?
Well, let me go back to the point I made about to the students that we're all grasping in the dark looking forward. So I spent 25%, my team knows this because I just said this at an offsite we had, I spent 25% of my college career on academic probation. When I went back and joined the board of trustees at Dartmouth later, and I was introduced to to defend the
Not
students
linear,
like
see?
me. And when I sat down at my first board meeting with the other trustees, the chairman of the board said, everybody, this is Nate Fick, 14 years from academic probation to board of trustees. So I got a slow start in college. I had a hard time adjusting to freedom. And I had a professor my freshman year who was a former Green Beret, a former Special Forces officer, turned classicist, archaeologist. And I took his class. I naturally gravitated to the guy. He was a tremendous mentor and teacher. He had a big influence on me. I loved studying that stuff because it's perfect for the sort of the indecisive. You get language, you get politics, you get art, you get history. It's sort of everything. And then I realized that in that particular career field, there's really only one pathway. You're either getting a doctorate and you're going to be a professor and you're going to do that work, or you're going to go do something else in the world. And I made the latter choice.
And then you became a Marine.
And then I was very, very influenced by one person. And again, I mean, for students sitting here, don't underestimate. It really matters who you spend time with. And I was fortunate to spend time with Jerry Rudder, that professor I mentioned, and I was fortunate to go to a talk one night in 1997 at Dartmouth. Tom Ricks, who was then the Wall Street Journal's Pentagon correspondent, somebody I'm sure you know.
Yes.
And he had written a book called Making the Core about when he was at the Journal, he went to Mogadishu in the early 90s, and he was walking on a foot patrol one night in Mogadishu, a patrol led by a young Marine sergeant. And Tom was, walking along through the nighttime streets of Mogadishu, sort of marveling that he was putting his life in the hands of this, by all appearances, a kid, this young sergeant. And Tom was thinking, if this Marine was an intern at the Wall Street Journal, we wouldn't let him use the photocopier by himself. And so he wanted to learn more about the process by which that young Marine had been trained. He wrote this book, Making the Core, and he went on a tour of college campuses talking about it. And I went to his talk, had a profound influence on me, and I thought I want to be a part of that. I liked team sports. I liked the outdoors. It was no grand patriotic vision. It was more like, this would be terrific. I don't want to go to law school. I don't want to go to med school. I don't want to be a consultant. I don't want to be an investment banker. I'll go try this. And it was the 90s. It was pre 9/11.
What sorts of things did you learn once you became a Marine, either during the time you were becoming one or when you were leading other Marines? What sorts of things did you learn that have still been helpful to you now?
Yeah, it's a terrific proving ground, I think, for young people. The military is a terrific proving ground for young people because you're unavoidably making decisions of consequence, decisions that have real impact on real people immediately, and especially in combat. A couple of things that I learned that I really do try to carry with me. One, I had the benefit of working, again, for a really terrific person from whom I learned a ton. And I asked him once what his leadership philosophy was. And he said he thought about it for a little while, and then he said, it boils down for me to 3 words: officers eat last. So the unit leaders in the military generally are officers, and people can use that rank. That rank can either be a privilege or it can be a responsibility. And he used it or viewed it as a responsibility. So he would, sleep less than everybody else, eat less, drink less water, carry more weight, expose himself to more danger, and we loved him for it. So that notion, that leadership philosophy of his had a big impact on me. The second thing I learned, I was a very junior guy, way down at the bottom of the food chain in the military, but you see firsthand that there's a difference between legal authority and moral authority, between formal authority and informal authority. And in the military, your formal authority is obvious. You wear, rank insignia on your collar or your shoulder. Ribbons basically are it's like if we walked around with our CV stapled to our shirt. You can look somebody up and down and figure out pretty quickly where they've been and what they've done. That's legal authority. That's great. That buys you, a few minutes of credibility in a conversation. It buys you 2 seconds in a firefight. And what buys you time when the chips are down is moral authority. It's the informal authority that accrues to people who do their job well and take care of their people. And so that was a huge lesson for me, that it didn't really matter what the title was on your business card. It didn't really matter if you had the corner office. You could have a position of incredible influential leadership in an organization from any seat in the organization. And the flip side of that's also true. And we all know this, right? The heroes in any organization are the junior people who have immense moral authority. And the goats in any organization are the senior people who have no moral authority. And you see that very clearly, I think, in the military.
Well, you then went to a think tank and then went into the private sector. So how did your experience in the private sector, very competitive, very long hours, having to raise considerable amounts of funds, how did that experience either bear out your lessons or teach you something completely different?
Yeah. So what I liked in the military, and again, sort of like at the State Department, where I lucked into a moment where something new was being created. In the military, I also lucked into a moment where something new was being created, where after 9/11, there was huge demand for special operations forces. The Marine Corps had not contributed to the Special Operations Command when it was initially established in the 80s. And all of a sudden, well, not by fiat, by then Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, the Marines were building up a component within SOCOM, and I got to be a part of the early days of that. And what I realized I liked was building and leading teams. And I wanted to find a way to do that as a civilian. So I went to business school, which was great. I'm agnostic. It's right for some people, it's not right for others. For me, at that moment, it was great. And it gave me sort of the vocabulary and some network and some skills that I could take and port over to trying to build something in the private sector. I liked the early stage side of things, the venture capital side where companies get started and if they're successful, they scale and they grow. So our business, I mean, my first desk was an old door on 2 sawhorses. By the end, we had a global business. And it took 10 years, but by the end, we had a big global business. And I grew to really appreciate the, there was no bureaucracy, none, zero. We would ruthlessly root it out of our organization. And if we had people who thought bureaucratically, we fired them. We hired at will, we fired at will, we promoted at will. And you can really shape a culture when you have that freedom. And over time, it becomes self-reinforcing. Good gets better and bad gets worse. And so if you steward it and tend it the right way, it can become an immense force multiplier. And again, my team knows, I apologize, they hear me say the same things all the time. But I'm a big fan of Peter Drucker, the business writer's line that culture eats strategy for breakfast. We spend a lot of time focused on getting the right strategy. But if you have the perfect strategy, a perfect strategy will get screwed up by a bad team every single time. A good team will fix and then implement a bad strategy. So, forced to pick between team and strategy, I take team every time, and culture every time. And so, I think the private sector is a great place to build the muscle memory of establishing high-performing cultures, because it's hard to do in organizations where you don't have all those levers at your control.
Well, the obvious follow-up question is, given all those lessons and how much you hated bureaucracy and fired the people who were involved in it, how are those lessons translating into the State Department?
This is where I'm going to draw my well of diplomatic expertise.
Feel free.
Look, in all seriousness, the State Department has to do things that no company, regardless of how large, has to do. It has to operate at truly global scale. Even the biggest companies in the world are not truly global. They don't actually have offices in all the places that the State Department has offices. They don't actually have to engage on the range of issues on which the State Department has to engage. And so I stand by everything I said about building culture and being anti-bureaucracy in a private company. And Secretary Blinken said on the stage at the RSA conference when we rolled out the international strategy, he said, moving fast and breaking things is the exact opposite of what we try to do at the State Department. Move fast and break things has become sort of a Silicon Valley mantra, and it's great in that iterative product development, learn from your customers sort of mindset. What we need from the Department of State on behalf of the United States is some degree of consistency across time, across geography, on policies, across administrations. And so I understand and appreciate the need for some sort of bureaucratic stability in a place like the State Department. That said, I do think that we are our own worst enemies in some ways that need to get fixed, and really seriously need to get fixed. Because ultimately in the 21st century, every one of us in economic terms is a free agent. The 40 years and a watch career that used to be dominant in this town and was dominant in the town that I grew up in, that world is gone. And so every one of us is a free agent. That presents huge opportunity. It also creates risk. What it means from a talent standpoint, though, for organizations like the State Department is we're going to have to find a way, especially in our portfolio, in the tech portfolio, where our competitive set is the whole world. You know, I've got to compete with every tech company in the world to hire people. And if we don't have the kind of atmosphere where smart young people can flourish, then we're out of luck. And they don't want to spend 6 hours booking an airline ticket, and nor should they. They don't want to spend 3 days getting a bunch of meaningless clearances on a simple piece of paper, and nor should they. So organizationally, bureaucratically, administratively, there's some things that I would say actually are existential, because we're all in talent organizations. You know, at the end of the day, all of our assets that really matter go down the elevator at night and go home. Otherwise, we've got a bunch of 1970s office chairs and crappy computers. And we need to be competitive in keeping people, and good people don't want to spend time doing meaningless work.
Well, we have a lot of people in the audience who have lots of options with their careers. Mm-hmm. They can go on and make very high salaries mm-hmm. in the private sector, and yet they also want to be heavily mission-driven. So why should our undergraduates and graduates at Carnegie Mellon, who are very highly sought, why should they go into public service? Why should they come and work for you at the State Department? Because it is the most important, meaningful work you could do in the world right now. And trust me, I have done both. Over the arc of a career, whether that's a 20-year career, a 40-year career, over the arc of a career, you have time to do a lot of stuff. And you don't have to make a 40-year single monogamous choice. Again, free agency. You could do a 20-year career in public service or building a business and still have another 20 to do something else. So I reject the false choice. I think you can do both. I think that given how central our not only our economy but how much our society relies on tech across every aspect of human flourishing today, we're really out of luck if we don't have public servants in a democratic society who understand the tech and have commercial sensibility. We are equally out of luck if we don't have business executives and academic leaders who are public-minded, who are interested in and involved in the affairs of our time. And I don't mean hedge fund managers who like to tweet directives at people in public policy. I have no time for them. They should get in the fight. And I think the person in the arena, idea matters here. Chip shots from the sidelines have limited utility. So I would encourage you, whether it's at the beginning, the middle, the end, both, all, spend time in public service. You will learn a ton. You'll have an immense sense of meaning and purpose. And I think actually there's a degree of moral bankruptcy for senior technology executives who never do anything to contribute back to the society that has created the opportunities for them. Well, what would one of our undergraduates or graduates do? What would a day look like if they were very heavily tech qualified and not as qualified and not as experienced in doing work in the U.S. government? Yeah. So the beautiful thing about the answer to that question is there's no single answer to it. Okay. I'll take the State Department. I've said this before, is a curious person's paradise in the sense that any issue in the world, any policy topic, any geographical issue, any language, like anything, there's somebody there, probably a group of people there, who know as much or more about it than anybody else in the world. So it can be a little bit of a choose your own adventure book. I will put him on the spot. Yair, I'm going to use you as an example, just a couple of things that we've done together recently. And Yair is not at the beginning of his career, but
with a decade of investment, somebody can be in a position to do kind of the things that we do together. Our last couple of trips, we went to Kyiv, take the overnight train from Poland to Ukraine, and met with the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine to talk about how technology is determining the outcome of that war, and what more we, the United States, can do to support them. The interesting thing in Ukraine is there's always this duality of winning the war and winning the peace, and tech is part of both. How do you, at the same time, use tech to win the war and look to tech as an incredible enabler of the post-conflict economy, a revenue generator, a way to keep smart young Ukrainians in Ukraine? We have a lot of work happening, on that topic. After that, we went to Moldova, to Chisinau, the capital city of Moldova, where there's a pair of important elections coming up at the end of October, an EU referendum and then a re-election, hopefully, of the Moldovan president. The Russians are trying to subvert that at every turn, and you again, I'll use the example. Yair, after that visit, we met with the National Security Advisor, we met with the Foreign Minister, we met with the head of the Election Commission, we met with the head of the Cybersecurity Agency, and we have since been working closely with American technology companies to provide very rapid security support to Moldova to safeguard their elections and make sure that their election reflects the will of the Moldovan people and not the will of an outside actor. That's pretty heady, consequential stuff to get to work on. And it requires a translation capability between the commercial world and the government world. It's very meaningful, important work.
Well, now what about the vision and the initiative that you've introduced for people who are not tech savvy, who are currently diplomats in the State Department? You have a training program that you've begun very aggressively. Can you tell us about that vision and the results that you've already achieved?
I think there's a misconception in the department or maybe across the U.S. government that you have to be writing code, building products, be a data scientist in order to do this work. That is fundamentally not true. One of the things we're trying to do is dispel that myth and say to our diplomats, actually, what we need are your diplomatic skills. We need your diplomatic background, your diplomatic experience, your diplomatic understanding, and we need it applied to these technology areas. So our training is not designed to create software engineers. Our training is designed to equip our diplomats with the technical knowledge that they need in order to represent us on these topics around the world. The demand signal for this inside our organization is sky high. We candidly have been unable to meet it. We need to continue scaling just to meet the demand, which is great. And it skews a little bit. This is anecdotal, but it's, as you might expect, I think it skews young and it skews smart, which is a good way to skew in terms of who your colleagues are. So that's exciting. We've trained a couple hundred of these people. We have a goal of having a basically trained cyber and digital officer in every U.S. mission around the world by the end of this year. So we're in the last quarter, and we'll hit the goal. We also made a change to the selection criteria for American ambassadors around the world. Every year, there's a selection board where career members of our foreign service, senior career members of our foreign service get evaluated to become chiefs of mission ambassadors in countries. And there are 5 selection criteria right now. One of them is an understanding of and a commitment to cybersecurity and digital topics. That's amazing. That's the elevation of these issues to the center, as you said in the introduction, the center of American diplomacy.
All right, I'll ask you one last question, and then we'll open the floor for questions from the audience, so be thinking about those. Now I want to move to the kind of broader global vision that you have about digital solidarity and how you're building that digital solidarity with our allies and some of the challenges that you're trying to work against, practical things that you have lots of experience with. Anything you'd like to say about that?
Sure. So I mentioned this last night, but one of the last things I did before coming into government was co-chair a task force report at the Council on Foreign Relations on cybersecurity. The first sentence of our report was, "The era of the global internet is over," which is not the future that any of us want. It's not the future that we are trying to achieve. It is increasingly the future that we are getting because of the Great Firewall in China, because of authoritarian misuse of what has been, or had been, for the first 25 years of its existence, a mostly free, open, and interoperable global internet. That leads to a worse future for all of us, most especially for the people inside those authoritarian regimes, but a worse future for all of us. So you have that pressure on a free and open global internet. You also have another competitive pressure that's increasingly getting traction, which is the idea of digital sovereignty. And there are some understandable antecedents for this idea. Of course, every government in the world has a duty to safeguard the sovereignty of its citizens. It's like fundamentally why we pay taxes, right? It's why governments exist, to safeguard our sovereignty, our independence, our freedom, our freedom from outside interference. So there's a strand of sovereignty that is, of course, totally legitimate. There is the long shadow, to be completely candid, of Edward Snowden and the effects of U.S. policy, particularly with some of our close allies and partners with regard to data access and related issues. And there's frustration with the dominance of American global tech. And some of it's frustration, some of it's jealousy, some of it is legitimate unhappiness with some of the negative ramifications of large global technology platforms. So all of that, though, is feeding this digital sovereignty push. So you have digital sovereignty, you have the fragmentation of the internet, and kind of pull those threads out, and it leads us to a really bad place. So the orienting principle of our U.S. international cyberspace and digital policy strategy is this notion of digital solidarity, and the idea that those of us who share values in some fundamental ways, who are generally like-minded in how we view rights-respecting development, deployment, and use of tech, and what the right sort of interaction between governments and individuals in these areas is, which is to say, kind of full protection for human rights online, offline, extended online, a full commitment to multi-stakeholderism, ensuring that this isn't just like a condominium of governments, but it includes companies, it includes civil society at every level. That's what we mean by digital solidarity, building and strengthening the relationships among the dozens, if not more, countries that share that basic commitment. Because going back to where we started, if you believe, as I do believe, that geopolitics is back above the waterline, there's a major global competition that's underway, and the first or vanguard battleground of that competition is in tech, then this is very much in our self-interest to sort of build this coalition as strongly and as quickly as we can.
All right. Well, the floor is open now for questions. I would ask you to wait for the microphone, and also please either say your name and your affiliation, or if you just want to give us your affiliation, that's also okay. But do tell us what you're doing here. Are you an undergraduate? Are you a part of our program or whatever? Okay? So we'll start with this one here.
Good afternoon. My name is Zader Hernandez. I'm a graduate student at Hines, second year, focusing on public policy and technology. My question to you, Ambassador Fick, is what do you see the role of cities in digital diplomacy being compared to the traditional perspective of diplomacy from the state perspective? Is there an opportunity for cities such as Pittsburgh or even New York, San Francisco to be new leaders in this development of digital diplomacy? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a terrific question. I think the answer to that is an emphatic yes. And Secretary Blinken has made subnational diplomacy one of the priorities of his tenure as Secretary of State. We have a special envoy for subnational diplomacy, Nina Hachagian, who was the deputy mayor of Los Angeles. And in addition to Pittsburgh, I've tried to make a point of visiting a number of these cities in the United States that can play that role because of generally anchored by institutions of higher education, like Carnegie Mellon. Tulsa is on that list. Purdue University in Indiana is on that list. Vanderbilt in Nashville is doing incredible things in this area. The Rue Institute of Northeastern in my hometown of Portland, Maine is on that list. So I've been to all these places because the answer to your question is yes, that one of the remarkable things about tech is that in a way it can decouple employment from geography in some really good ways. When people may not want to pay $8,000 a month for a small apartment in Manhattan. They don't want to spend an hour on the train getting to work in Boston. And as tech companies grow and compete for talent, there are more and more opportunities to be kind of right at the leading frontier of innovative tech, whether that's on the research side in academia, on the purely practical side in terms of company building. And a lot of those opportunities are happening outside New York, outside San Francisco, Boston, the sort of traditional growth areas in the U.S. economy. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity because that is ultimately the wellspring of our strength. I said last night, tech innovation as a source of our national influence in the world is more and more foundational. The traditional measures that we're accustomed to, like GDP, are downstream of our leadership position in tech. And something like 85% of global technology market cap is in the United States. And those companies have offices everywhere. Those companies are being started everywhere. Those entrepreneurs are being trained everywhere. So yes, and it's really why fundamentally organizations like CMIST have a role to play in this ecosystem in Pittsburgh in helping connect what we're doing on the policy side and what's happening on the entrepreneurial side here. Yeah.
In the front row, please.
Hello, sir. Lieutenant Hamby, United States Space Force. I'm curious, you mentioned earlier the man in the arena quote and working with companies who maybe aren't in the arena and maybe don't want to be involved with public service or individuals who don't want to be. How are you trying to bring those individuals into maybe not necessarily fully into public service, but to have an open mind to public service, to be open to what you're doing with the State Department?
Yeah, I think, look, I was building a business during, like the 2015 encryption debates. Remember about Apple and backdoors on iPhones and lawful intercept and kind of these policy discussions that were dividing the Washington and Silicon Valley. And I had an office in both places. And I'd go to my Washington office and everybody's in like khaki pants and a collared shirt. And it's like, yes, sir, no, sir, security clearance land. And then I'd go to San Francisco and like the barefoot engineers would come in on Monday morning and say, sorry, boss, no security clearance for another 7 years, right? And you need both of these cultures to find a way to coexist in the service of a greater mission. I think it's a good thing that we see some companies taking more principled stands on this. Look, employees have absolutely every right to vote with their feet. They should work for an organization that shares their values. I am not pushing some sort of a monoculture here at all. And I do believe that there, again, I'll keep coming back to this, I think there's a global competition brewing, and tech is one of the primary places where that competition is unfolding. And if the generally open, representative, rights-respecting operating system doesn't prevail, then really big ideas are under pressure. And I mean the biggest ideas: representative government, equal treatment of all people, market economies. And so we need to harness the U.S. and like-minded tech innovation leaders in support of that objective. So when, I'm not going to name names, but when a large American technology company basically had employees pressure it out of working with the US government on some important programs, and then they got new leadership, and employees tried to do that again, and the leadership said, you're free to leave the company, that's fine, but we're doing this because it's the right thing to do. I am much more in that camp. Again, people are free agents, they can vote with their feet, they can go work where they want to work. But having employees exercise their personal political views again and again to sway corporate strategy away from working with the US government on these topics is ultimately massively self-defeating.
A question in the long sleeves here. Yes, you.
Well, firstly, Mr. Ambassador, thank you for coming to speak with us this morning. My name is Anthony Cachado. I am a student of economics and political science here at CMIST. I appreciate that you took a moment to kind of get into what Edward Snowden had revealed, and as we become more engaged with the tech side of policy, it appears to be a more important facet of our diplomatic action. What are some concrete ways you think that we can try to uphold a robust right to privacy, as well as hold our liberal democratic allies accountable to that standard?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think I'll give you one, in my view, very positive, concrete example. This administration several months ago released an executive order prohibiting the misuse of commercial spyware. In parallel with that executive order, we released a joint statement, which is the kind of way to get international support for one of our domestic policies. And one of the things we do everywhere around the world is try to sign up other governments to endorse that joint statement and to essentially make the same commitments that the U.S. government's making in order to basically say we're just simply not going to engage in the use of commercial spyware in ways that threaten the privacy and human rights of journalists, of government employees, of others. So I think that's a good one, and it's a real one, and it's tangible, and it resonates with our allies and partners to the tune of many of them at this point having signed up alongside us.
In the back there with the black shirt.
Thank you. Good afternoon, sir. My name is Annika Santhanam. I'm a major in information systems. I'm an undergraduate, but I have a minor in cybersecurity at CMIST. So my question was, with a lot of cyber attacks that are compromising systems in both the government and the private sector, a lot of them come from like employees not understanding basic cybersecurity facets, like understanding what a phishing email looks like, or learning how to have secure passwords. And us as CMU students, we get these fake phishing emails all the time sent from CMU to test us on whether we know. And as we know, a lot of us fail. So, so I was wondering, are there any frameworks in that the government is working on in order to increase cyber literacy for the general public and also workers in the private and public sector?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I too have been the failing recipient of those internal phishing tests. As a matter of fact, in our company, we had a wall of shame in headquarters where we would put the name and picture of everybody who failed the internal phishing training. And there was one really terrible week where I failed it. So as the CEO, I was up there. And then my assistant failed it on my behalf. So I was up there twice. It was awful. And the broader point there is I think that has to be the culture. You've got to almost embrace the failure because it's the only way to learn. And if people sweep it under the rug and are embarrassed to say anything, then you're still going to have the breaches. You're just not going to know about it. So I do think part of it's cultural inside our organizations. And just to internationalize that for a moment, we see this manifest itself with allies and partners around the world in societies where there might be a much stronger culture of saving face. They end up being less cyber secure because admitting weakness or failure is the essential first step in a lot of ways to making an organization stronger. And so you run into sort of national heritage, culture, history on these technology topics, which is interesting. But your question, though, about it's really about, I hear it as about almost public education. And one area where I think we need to do it, and we're talking about how we'll do that, and I'll just say, right, my organization has no domestic remit, none. All of our work is outside the United States. But with my interagency colleagues who have domestic responsibility, like the Department of Homeland Security or some other parts of the government, the FBI, in the context of deepfakes and AI-generated content broadly, election-related content, but broadly. I think it's probably safe to say most individual citizens overestimate their ability to detect a deepfake. People think, oh, I'll see it, I'll know if it's not real. It's just not true. And so we need a robust domestic public education campaign, not to teach people how to spot a deepfake, but to teach people that they're not going to spot a deepfake. And so to inject a degree of skepticism into, make that their first reaction when they see some crazy appearing piece of content online. And look, we have a pretty good history, I would say, of changing behavior via concerted public messaging. The U.S. did it around smoking, right? It did it around seatbelts. It did it around, ski helmets, which was not a thing when I was growing up. So there's precedent here, but it does take a concerted effort.
So what do you think, guys? A wall of shame right out there? I'm sure I'd be the first one on it.
Which would be the most important thing to do, actually.
Okay, I'll note that. Yes, with the blue polo shirt. Your hand was up first.
Thank you. My name is Ty Boyle. I'm a public policy and management student at Hines College, and I'm an Army active duty infantry officer here with the Downing Scholarship from the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point. So I know you have before said that Americans don't viscerally understand the amount of content that we see that is foreign country influenced. What is your greatest concern in terms of the upcoming election in foreign countries' influence?
Yeah, I think, again, just to draw a sort of a bright line, the interagency task force that has responsibility for safeguarding the integrity of the U.S. elections does not include the State Department. A remit is outside the country. I do think that we're seeing, and look, there's been, this has been publicly reported on. You see different foreign actors actually trying to support different candidates in our election. It's all equally egregious and inappropriate. It's dangerous, it's escalatory, it's unacceptable. The role of my organization in this regard is really twofold. One is to convey to our foreign adversaries in different fora that this behavior will have consequences for them, and try to extend deterrence into this domain in order to try to squelch that behavior. And the second thing that we do is work with our allies and partners, most of whom also have democratic elections, many of whom have democratic elections this year, most of whom have democratic elections that are under similar assault. I mentioned Moldova as one example, but to make sure that they too are as free from foreign interference as possible, because look, we're all interconnected here. The tactics, techniques, and procedures that get refined in a place like Moldova or Ukraine or Estonia are TTPs that we then see further refined, more dangerous, applied here.
If you're interested in that topic, by the way, little advertisement here, but we have an event coming up in the Deeper Conversations series, which is about nefarious actors and their intervention into the U.S. And it has three people. One's an academic, one's a think tanker, and the third person is from the Microsoft Threat Analysis Center. So I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation, so watch out for that.
Nice.
Yes, in front of, yes, right there.
Hi, sir. I'm John, graduate student at CMIST and lieutenant in the Air Force. I want to piggyback on Annika's question about improving cyber literacy in our population. I've always been fascinated by Israel's institutionalization of cyber education, starting from early school, and especially with Unit 8200 with their alumni creating companies like Waze, Checkpoint, Palo Alto Networks. I'm curious if you would like to see a similar institutionalization of technology and cyber literacy in our country to eventually feed into the goals of national security at the high level.
Yeah, I think, look, in generic aspirational terms, the answer to that for me is yes. I don't think it's any accident that 3 of the countries around the world where you see the highest degree of cyber literacy and the highest degree of fluency, well, of 2 countries where it's absolutely true, are Israel and Estonia. What they both have in common is it has been existential for them. Which has a way of focusing the mind and getting people aligned and willing to invest the time and the energy in learning about these things. There's an opportunity in a place like Ukraine to do something similar, where Ukraine, at the end of this conflict, however and whenever it ends, is going to have a large and experienced offensive cyber core. And what happens with those people, what direction all of that expertise gets turned in, is going to matter for Ukraine, and it's going to matter for the rest of us. So there are important conversations happening between the Estonian, Israeli, and Ukrainian governments about that to help ensure that all of that operational experience, akin to Unit 8200, becomes the foundation for a thriving kind of digital innovation economy in cybersecurity, which is a really cool opportunity. I think we can do it here, probably in a less even way. It's going to be a little bit more patchwork. You have a real opportunity to do it in kind of ecosystems like this one, where you have the various ingredients coming together. I think realistically, we're not going to see 350 million Americans sort of locking arms on this and saying how much this matters in the same way that you see it with just a couple million Estonians or 7 or 8 million Israelis. But it's a worthy goal, and I think it could happen at the ecosystem level, if not at the national level.
Okay, I think we can take one last question before we must. In the back, yes.
John Chan, junior faculty member here in CMIST. Last night you took us on a little bit of a global tour of 5 places around the world. I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate on opportunities and strategies for developing digital solidarity, particularly in the global South. Maybe places like Africa, right, where there maybe are issues of digital divide, where the region might be awash in certain places with the Wagner Group, Russian mercenaries, awash in Russian disinformation. There's sort of growing geopolitical competition there. So I'm just wondering how you're sort of thinking about situations like that. Yeah.
Thanks for asking it. I'll recap just a couple things from last night to sort of level set the conversation for everybody here. We spend a lot of time, and I'm sure you spend a lot of time in an atmosphere like this one, talking about the very high end of tech, sort of the frontier, bleeding edge of what's most exciting, what's coming. And we're all doing that in a world where 1/3 of the people on this planet still don't have any basic connectivity. So we do have to keep that always in mind. And the United Nations is a one country, one vote system. So I would say we have 2 imperatives. We have a kind of moral and ethical imperative as human beings who have benefited from technology and economic development, over a long period of time in our history and our culture here in the United States. I do feel that there is some imperative to make sure that access to that tech is broadened. At the same time, there's a very clear geopolitical imperative in a one state, one vote system where, if you want the majority of the world aligning over time with a more inclusive, rights-respecting operating system, as I've said, then they need to see something in it for them in very tangible terms. There has to be some affirmative reason why they would do it. And so a couple of things that we're doing. One is those undersea cable connectivity projects, again, that I talked about last night. I used Tuvalu as an example last night, a country of 11,400 people. It's a remote, small Pacific island nation that a Google trunk cable was going to run very near Tuvalu, but there was no market imperative to connect Tuvalu itself. So for a relatively small amount of money, we and some other donor nations were able to fund a branch in order to connect Tuvalu. So we're 11,400 people closer to closing that connectivity divide in the world. And we need to just keep doing that. Another thing that we can do is ensure that access to the benefits of emerging technologies like AI is not limited to institutions like this one, frankly, that can afford the compute. The panel last night talked a little bit about the UN Sustainable Development Goals and how most of them are off track. And one of the only ways to alter the slope of the line toward achieving them at this stage is probably the application of new technologies. And so making sure that there is equitable, it's never going to be equitable, but more equitable access to the benefits of AI for citizens in countries that cannot on their own afford it is important, which is why we did an event on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York on Monday with Secretary Blinken, with Sam Altman, with the leaders of a bunch of the other leading AI businesses, and a handful of foreign ministers from around the developing world, in order to make clear that we're going to work hand in hand with our companies to make sure that this happens. And so in that event, they committed about $100 million of compute. That's meaningful. That's the price of a big, expensive building on a campus like this one. And so, that's gonna buy some real access to solve real problems, and we need to keep going.
Well, thank you so much for honoring us by being here, and more importantly, thank you for your inspirational leadership and all of the things that you're doing for our country and for the world, because they're so desperately needed. And anything that we can do to help support you, we're eager to do. But I really want to express my gratitude to you on behalf of myself and also all the people in the audience. Thank you.
Dr. Cronin, thank you. And thanks to all the students in the room for your interest in this intersection of tech and public policy. And really, I think I can say on behalf of my colleagues here, come on in, the water's fine. Spend a little time in public service over the course of your career. So thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Nate.
Glad to-